I have, I would say, some pretty similar but also unique thoughts on the whole progression thing, specifically pertaining to rest intervals. I'm a really big fan of employing cluster sets when applicable, specifically for hypertrophy. And the idea of that is getting in a certain amount of, like, a lot of work actually in a short amount of time. That's one way that I like to employ density training. So for those that aren't familiar, essentially do like an AMRAP, like as many reps as you can with like a rope press down, for example. You rest a little bit, and then you're doing clusters of between 3 and 5 reps for up to 7 minutes with like 10-second breaks in between those clusters. And you end up getting a lot of work in that way. With regards to timed rest intervals for like straight sets, I also like reducing the sets, or not the sets, the rest periods for those sets, specifically with an advanced individual that it's harder to just add a rep or add a set or add more weight. And we're kind of picking every fruit that we can to try to drive progression. It's not something that I would use for someone that's intermediate or new, just because you don't need to do that. And I only ever do that for smaller isolations with low absolute loads where it's just hard to add weight to it week to week or month to month. So like a rope push down, a curl, something like that.
So I want to touch on both of those actually. So for the ones that's like a cluster, you would do an AMRAP, and then are you counting 10 seconds? Are you just saying, hey, you have a total of 5 minutes, get as many reps as you can in 5 minutes? Like, how are you specifically going about that?
I tell people to put on a song just because we're not reliable narrators with counting, rest times, because 10 seconds could easily turn into 30. And people have said to me, well, I did your 5 minute cluster set method and it took 20 minutes. I'm like, dude, how did that happen? It's a 5 minute cluster. You do it. So I just tell people to turn on a song that they like. You're pretty much just getting as many reps as you can until that song is over. And you pick like a song that's like 5 minutes long. So it could be like some heavy metal or whatever the case may be. And that also makes it fun for people. They've had a lot of fun with it for that reason, because it's tied to something other than training, some tangential, hobby like music, whatever their favorite band is or whatever. I really, really like that, but I don't have that as a commonplace staple in programming. It's really just like I said, if they have an isolation that's been really stubborn and hasn't been responding the best to more conventional progression, we'll throw that in there. And I've personally found that that's always done the trick in breaking a plateau with those smaller isolations.
Interesting. So, I mean, I assume it could be a different song each week. So this sounds like it's a little bit less standardized of like this is the exact thing. This kind of sounds more like like in like the old school bodybuilding days, they would throw out these like burnout sets at the end, right? And like they didn't necessarily count reps, and they would just kind of add it almost like an intensity technique. It kind of sounds more like that than it is like a standard progression.
I do standardize it a bit, and then I like ask people to like record the cluster set so that they can make sure that they do a little bit more the next time we do it. And we only ever do it for 2 to 4 weeks at a time, so it's not very long that they're doing it. But
Gotcha.
I do want to make sure that you're either getting in more quality reps, because they start to look a little sloppy towards the end,
Sure. Sure.
or you're adding more total reps overall.
And then for the ones that are more, like you said, the more straight sets, you're still limiting the rest time progressions to isolated movements. And so you would just have them count, like, let's say 2 minutes between sets one week, and then like a minute and 55 seconds the next week, something like that.
Absolutely. And we never go, I would say, any lower than 60 seconds. Like, it's no 30-second rest interval stuff that we're doing. It's typically we'll start at like a standard rest interval for isolation, which is like 90 seconds to 2 minutes for me. And then we'll maybe take between 15 and 30 seconds away from that weekly,
Yeah.
keeping load and reps the same, and then going, back up in rest period, and then adding a little bit of weight. And then invariably, usually that'll allow them to, progress in rate, weight, and stay in their rep range.
Yeah. I always found rest times funny because so when I first got into this, and I was like following Body for Life back in like high school and whatnot, and I was neurotic with the rest time. So if it was like 120 seconds rest, I think the average person would like finish the set, go over, and they'd either just think of what 2 minutes was, or even they'd hit their timer, but then 120 seconds would go by. Then they'd probably go back to the equipment and they'd get started. Whereas by the time you've done all that, now it's maybe 3 minutes, right? I would like finish the set, count the number of seconds, hit the stopwatch, and then plan for like my 10 to 15 seconds to get back into position. Like I was doing the exact time. And I was doing that on every single set, which I just don't think was that necessary or helpful. And eventually I just stopped doing rest times at all, which obviously could get ridiculous if somebody's just taking forever. And you also have to consider that, like, let's say you do 2 sets of bench press, 225 for 10, 225 for 10, right? And then, you got 225 for 10, 225 for 12, whatever. Obviously, these numbers don't make a lot of sense in that regard. But if that was just done for because you rested longer, you might not have actually progressed at all, right? But the way I see it is like if you're doing this long enough and you don't have, again, absurd rest times, eventually slight increases in your rest time to get progression are going to be made up for. Like over a year of progressing and everything, like if you went from 120 seconds to 135 seconds, like that's just not going to make the difference to like cancel out any progression that was made. So I don't personally focus on rest times. However, I do rest pause sets. And so during that time, I will, because I don't want it to get out of control. And obviously the whole point of, well, not the whole point, a point of rest pause sets is to be a little bit more efficient with your time, right? And I know for me, because I do like to rest a while, these workouts can get to like 2 hours long. So I kind of force myself to get faster if I do rest pause. If you guys are familiar with DC training and like Dante Trudell's dog crap training, they would talk about 12 to 15 breaths, which is in reality, if you see these guys training, these like bigger guys, that can be close to a minute. So I just keep it at like 40 seconds, but I might do, first set might be 15 reps, wait 40 seconds, then it might be 7, wait 40 seconds, and it might be 4. And it's not that I find this is superior. The studies on this are kind of ambiguous. Like, there's a few that show that it's superior, a few that show neutral. I don't know if I've seen any that show it's negative, but in any case, it's just something to kind of like keep it interesting and keep things faster. But I generally try not to obsess too much on the rest times.
What types of exercises do you use rest pause for typically, or is it just across the board?
I will do it with both compounds and isolations, but generally not anything that takes a lot of positioning. Like a barbell bench press is a horrible exercise to do that for, right? Because like there's setup, or even worse, a dumbbell bench press where you have so much energy going into kicking it up and everything. Like I think I tried out like a dumbbell shoulder press one time. And, I was lifting like some pretty heavy weights. I mean, not, I guess heavy by the internet standards these days, but, like 90 to 100-pound dumbbells. And, I'd kick them up and, I might get like 8 to 10 reps. And then I'd rest 40 seconds and I try to kick it up and I wouldn't even get one because so much went into that initial, like kicking up and everything. So I think those exercises, squats, deadlifts, I would not recommend those for rest pausing. I'm sure people can do it, but generally speaking, I would say isolation exercises or things that are easier to get into position for.
Like machines and things like that, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do them, and actually I do them for pull-ups at home. And when I do that, I will actually drop the weight. So I'll do, what do I do? Like 90 pounds for 8, and then I'll take the belt off, and then I'll do body weight, and I'll get like another 8, and then I'll do body weight for like 5 or something like that. So just because there are certain exercises that I just don't want to do a set of like 18 for my first set, it's just like less pleasant, and I like keeping some heavier stuff in there. So but general guidelines, yes, like machines and isolations are a little bit better for it.
That's pretty much how I do it. I was just curious how you like to do it.
Yeah. Landon, do you incorporate any sort of either drop sets, rest pause, anything like that?
Length and partials or cheat reps past failure on sub lifts I do. So
Okay.
Especially on calf raises, I've been absolutely destroying my calves. I do it a lot on cable lateral raises too. I think especially for lifts that are short and biased, so where the tension is mostly placed in the shortened position, doing partials past failure or cheat reps are great. And then for stubborn muscles too, something like a calf where it's just hard to generate that much force, I think the length and partials are nice because you can really just emphasize the stretch and training that length and position. As far as like rest pause or anything goes, I haven't been doing a whole ton of that for kind of a while at this point. I've just been purely focusing on straight sets and maximizing what I can get in one solid effort for most of my training. And I found that that works really well for me. But with that being said, I have been thinking about going back into some other intensity techniques like a rest pause or something like that recently, just to see how it goes, because now I've been consistently progressing at a consistent rate for a while. So if I was to incorporate like a rest pause, I'd be curious to see how that changes things, especially if everything else is generally the same, like my bulk status, my surplus, and my overall volume and frequency and stuff.